Go.
Okay, I believe Marvel is cinema because it's one of the best movie franchises out there. Like millions of people go to see it every single time there's a new movie release, and it's always
I think Marvel is pretty much cinema too, but I also agree with his point when he said that they're all too much alike. Like they have the same concept going on every movie. Like it's not really predictable.
So I agree with him, Martin, because when he says no, I don't agree with him. I do think that Marvel is like a cinematic type of thing because in each film, so I feel like what makes a movie art is that it tells a story and there's facts behind it. And in all of the films, there is some sort of history behind it, and you learn something from it. And Captain America, it was based in World War II, and Iron Man, it had to do with the Afghanistan war and the Iranian war. And for Black Panther, I just think that was a huge cinematic point for Marvel because no one's ever really Marvel itself. It's had 18 films, I think 18 films overall. It's never stepped foot into being so culture based, you know what I mean? Black Panther was in Wakanda, and Marvel has never really had a predominantly black cast, and I feel that was what made Marvel so cinematic.
Okay, so going off what you were saying, I know in his piece, Martin Scorsese, or however you say his name.
Scorsese?
Yeah. He was saying how Marvel doesn't take risks, but they're very into the political scheme right now. Mm-hmm. With Black Panther and addressing the African American identity crisis kind of. I think that his point isn't really valid because they are delving into such present and prevalent topics.
So you were saying how he says that Marvel doesn't take risks, and I say going into Black Panther was a huge risk because I say the audience wise, if some I feel people were to get intimidated seeing an all black powerful cast, and in the Black Panther NPR, they were saying how this was the first look of the feast of black excellence, and it was onslaught of greatness, portraying a society of greatness, and there was just so much black representation and African representation, and I feel that was a big risk to take because not a lot of people can take that well when there's so much of
they might perceive
it as wrong,
trying to say
but what it was trying to say was just a bunch of representation, and in regular films, it's predominantly white cast, and the major characters are white and the supporting actors are white, and you have one little token black person in the film, but in this film, I was saying, if a black person dies in Black Panther, it's fine because there's so many other black people, you know what I mean? Yeah.
I agree. So I was gonna add on to that how it was I think it was a great challenge for Black Panther to not only embody the black excellence part, but the feminism part of the almost the all-female army militia, and I think that was an extremely tough role to take on because in that political stature or whatever, nobody really there was opposing opinions on stuff like that about male superiorness and things like that.
I kind of agree with Martin Scorsese on a bit because as the Marvel movies themselves take risks artistically, but as a movie, it's Marvel movies, their source is the comic books, and if you go back and you read the comic books, they're pretty very almost identical to the comic books. So I think what he's kind of saying is they're not really art because it's just a film version of a comic book. And there's other movies that are based off books like the James Bond series or Die Hard or Harry Potter. okay, that's
That's cinematic. That's cinematic.
but those movies have like people who add on like during the process of filming they add certain parts that aren't in the source material. So I think what he's kind of saying is that Marvel has a thing to sticking to the source material so much that it kind of gets to like you might as instead of going to see the movie you could just stay at home and just read the comics and you already know kind of what it is.
But then people are going to complain about the fact that
So yeah, what Dawson was saying. Okay, so the thing with Marvel movies is that like what Martin talks about here is they're like made for like the audience, and that's because Marvel movies, because they're based off the comics. When fans go and see the movie and they're like, oh, that's not like what happens in the comics, they're gonna get pissed. So that's why like the Marvel.
really what
Yeah, I'm so sorry, Kayla.
No, you're fine.
I don't know. I think that like, you know, because they like, I get it what you're saying. Like they can be kind of boring, and like because they are like so heavily based off like the comic book version. But I think by like producing so many sequels, you know, we're allowed to see like different perspectives of the same hero over and over again. If that makes sense.
So I can kind of agree with Martin on like maybe just the part where he's talking about how these major franchises like Marvel, you know, they get more notoriety when it comes to, you know, the box office and whatnot. But like smaller budget films, you know, don't really get that much notoriety. That's probably the only thing I can really agree with him on, because I feel like the points that he's making about what separates Marvel movies from like cinema, I feel like the points that he's making could technically be something that Marvel has spoken about. So like I highlighted this quote that it says, cinema was about revelation, aesthetic, emotional, and spiritual revelation, the complexity of people and their contradictory and sometimes paradoxical natures. And I feel like when you think of like the movie The Spiderverse, like I was watching the video and the guy was talking about how the characters, and they were very complex and kind of like realistic. And, you know, there are definitely some elements within those films that I didn't think you really considered, you know, like with Black Panther too.
So I kind of do agree with Martin Scorsese, how do you say his name? Like Marvel like is very good. I love Marvel movies. Like I'm a big Marvel fan, but I can see why he'd say like he doesn't really consider it an art form, because they're basically reproducing the same story over and over again. Like they have the same, like there's the superhero, they face a problem, they deal with like inner turmoil or like outer turmoil, stuff like that. But then like there's other movies out there. Like I went to go see the movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. That was like amazing, because like I would have never expected a movie like that, because it was just very different and very entertaining to me. But yeah.
First thing, love that movie, great movie. And I was actually gonna talk about that movie, like going off what you're saying, like each Marvel movie is pretty much the same. It's like you got the superhero that gets their powers, and then there's the bad guy who has some sort of like moral rightness, but kind of thing. But it's the form of like, you would think that if you were just like an average movie watcher watching the Marvel movies, you would think that they were all made by the same director every time. But there's actually like a lot of directors that do the Marvel movies. And one thing that I think Martin Scorsese was saying, like, each director has their own special thing that makes their movies unique. Like, in Quentin Tarantino movies, he takes historical stories and he adds a twist to them, or he makes movies that, like, have a certain amount of, like, action and, like, raunchiness to it, but it's still enjoyable for, like, teens and adults such. So I think he's basically saying that the Marvel movies aren't bad, but he thinks that for it to be an art form, there's no sense of, like, it's not like James Gunn, he made the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, but they will forever be known as the Marvel movies, not a James Gunn movie. So I think he's seeing it as more of like an artist. The artist is getting overshadowed by the business that it's owning, that's owning the property to the movie.
I think a lot of what I'm hearing and a lot of what I agree with is the fact that like Marvel movies as they are now, like, just don't have any depth. Like, I feel like I have no connection with the characters. Like, the last Avengers movie just felt like a comedy movie. Like, I just felt like the whole thing was, like, joke after joke after joke. Like, okay, yeah, there's action. Yeah, there's some character connection. But, like, I just don't, I don't know. I literally turned it off. Like, I just don't feel like they have any, like, they have any, like, depth to them emotionally. I don't know if you've had
I agree with Martin Scorsese. I think that Marvel movies are, and he says, the pictures are made to satisfy a specific set of demands, and they are designed as variations on a finite number of themes. And he also says that many films today are perfect products manufactured for immediate consumption. And I feel like most Marvel films these days just really aren't original, and they're just literal reskins of any other Marvel movie ever. Just with different characters and maybe different events. But it's all the same basic plotline.
I mean, I love Marvel movies. I've seen like everyone, but they're all the same.
I do have like an exception because even though the Marvel Cinematic Universe is pretty much the same movie, like Nick said, I do think that Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is a very good exception for the whole Marvel like superhero bad guy kind of mold. I watched the Spiderverse video, and it was kind of like saying that Miles Morales is this just like everyday teenager that he just wants to go about and hang out with his Uncle Aaron. But the thing that the movie does good is it has a show that like the first act of the whole movie is about getting to know Miles Morales and why he feels the way he does and why he acts the way he does. And then so that when the other spider people come in the second act of the movie, it doesn't feel like they're overshadowing Miles Morales. Kind of like how the whole Avengers as a whole kind of overshadows each individual Avenger because it's all about the team. But in Spider-Verse, it's about the team based around this one person. So I think that the Spider-Verse has really broken the mold for most Marvel movies, and I think it's because Spider-Man has a more depth character, I think, than most Marvel characters. Because I also listened to the Stan Lee audio where it says that, and I know this just by like random knowledge, but Stan Lee like he prized Spider-Man more than any other. So he wanted to make sure that his character had depth. So even though that most Marvel movies don't follow what most people would say is an artistic cinema, I think that there are some Marvel movies that don't follow the mold of being a Marvel movie.
So how you were saying how the Spider-Man, whatever that one it was called, how that kind of broke off from the mold, from the mold of of Marvel. So like in that movie, I feel like people were able to like relate to Miles or whatever, and like the becoming of like a teenager and like just like kind of finding yourself. And I think, like I said before, like the same with like Black Panther, it was so like relatable in a sense to some people, like people like me. It was relatable in a sense of like an identity crisis where Killmonger where Killmonger, he I'm sorry. Killmonger, he was having an identity crisis because he's from Oakland, California, but his family is from Wakanda. But he, and just forget what I said, okay? I can't formulate my thoughts.
Okay.
I can't.
I'm gonna post this on.
I'm sorry.
To expand upon what Lawson was saying about, and I believe it was, but you guys were talking about how the film it lacks original thought and and